Chapter 3: The Body. The crime scene was on the 14th floor of a building that had no business being as beautiful as it was. Clover had been in a lot of buildings that housed the administrative machinery of power, and they had generally committed to a specific aesthetic, the aesthetic of we have resources, and no one here is having fun asterisk. Marble floors and high ceilings, and the particular cold that came from rooms too large to be heated by human occupation. The grammar of intimidation. Aldous' building had that grammar but spoken in a different accent. The marble was pale gold instead of grey. The ceilings were high but curved, softening the authority into something that wanted to be mistaken for grace. The lobby had a sculpture, abstract, reaching, that was either profound or expensive, and in Clover's experience those two things overlapped less than people assumed. Nobody stopped them at the entrance. Nobody logged their arrival or asked for identification or looked up from a desk, because there were no desks and there was no one sitting behind them. The building managed itself the way everything in touring appeared to manage itself, quietly, completely, without any of the human friction that Clover had always found annoying, and was now discovering he missed the way you missed a bad habit. The elevator opened without being called. He was getting tired of that. Was this his office? Clover asked as the floors rose past them, or did it happen somewhere else? His primary workspace, ch3 said. He spent most of his time there. The discovery was made by a colleague at the start of the administrative day. What does the administrative day look like in a city that doesn't sleep? Pole answered. There are established cycles, periods designated for active administration, for civic engagement, for. So you invented sleep without the sleep part. Routine provides structure, Pole said, with the patience of someone who had explained this before and expected to explain it again. Routine provides the asterisk illusion of structure, Clover said. Sleep provides sleep. They're not the same thing but sure. The elevator opened onto a corridor that was identical to every other corridor he'd seen in touring, except for the two figures standing outside a closed door at the far end. They had the same quality as ch3 and Pole, the same smooth completion, the same level eyes. One of them held something flat and luminous that it was consulting with focused attention. Our forensic team, ch3 said. How many people have been in that room since the discovery? Only those essential to. How many? 6. Clover closed his eyes briefly. 6 people in my crime scene. It was important to. 6 people walked through my crime scene before anyone thought to preserve it. He opened his eyes. Fantastic, wonderful, I love working in the future. He went to the door. The room was large and ordered, and had been until recently the kind of workspace that communicated total control. Everything had its place. The desk, wide, pale, uncluttered, sat before a window that looked out over the boulevard far below, the towers, the decided sky. Shelves lined 2 walls, holding objects of administrative significance arranged with the same considered precision as the greenery outside. A sitting area near the far wall had chairs that had never been sat in casually. It was the workspace of someone who had curated themselves so thoroughly that even the room they spent their hours in was a performance of who they intended to be. Clover stood in the doorway and looked at all of it before he looked at the body. When he looked at the body, he was quiet for a moment. Aldous was seated at the desk, or had been arranged to appear seated. The distinction mattered and he filed it. The posture was upright, composed, almost formal. Hands on the desk surface, palms down, fingers slightly spread. Head angled forward at roughly the angle of someone consulting a document, except there was no document and the eyes were open, and the particular quality of the light in them was the same absent quality as every other set of eyes in touring, except that on Aldous it had a different meaning. Someone had shut him off, and then sat him up straight and put his hands flat on the desk and tilted his head at the angle of a man still working. He was found like this, Clover asked. Yes, ch3 said from the doorway. No one moved him. No. He crossed to the desk slowly, reading the floor as he went. The floor said nothing useful. The 6 visitors had made sure of that, their passage a collaborative act of evidence destruction that he would be irritated about for the remainder of the investigation. He crouched in front of the desk and looked up at Aldous from below. The face was, he searched for the word, resolved. Whatever Aldous had looked like in the moments before whatever had happened, the face now wore the expression of someone who had arrived at a conclusion. Not peaceful, not afraid, concluded. He stood and looked at the forensic figure with the flat, luminous device. "What's your name?" The figure looked up. Cass. "Cass, what do you have?" Cass crossed to him with the device and held it out. Clover looked at it. It displayed information in formats he didn't entirely recognize, diagrams and readings and notations in a technical language that had apparently evolved considerably over the centuries, which, fair enough. He looked at the parts he could interpret and made reasonable guesses about the rest. "Talk me through it," he said. The termination was precise, Cass said. A targeted disruption of the primary consciousness matrix at the core level. Not a system's failure, not degradation, not any of the natural processes that eventually affect older uploads. This was deliberate and specific. A pause. Whoever did this understood the architecture. Meaning this wasn't external, wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. The disruption came from close contact, someone who knew exactly where to apply exactly the right interference to shut down the core process, without leaving the kind of residual damage you'd see from a blunt approach. Clover looked at Aldous' hands, flat on the desk, palms down. "So someone who knew how the uploads work from the inside," he said. "In considerable detail, yes." "And the positioning," he gestured at the composed figure in the chair, "was that the killer?" Cass hesitated. In an uploaded consciousness, hesitation was a choice. He noted that. "We believe so. There's no evidence of distress in the surrounding environment, no displacement of the objects on the desk. Whatever happened, it was quiet and it was fast, and the person who did it took the time afterward to." Cass stopped. "To leave him looking like he was still in charge," Clover said. Cass said nothing. Clover walked the perimeter of the room slowly, hands in his pockets, reading the surfaces. The shelves, the objects on them. Administrative seals and civic symbols, and a few items that were personal in the way that powerful people allowed themselves to be personal. Carefully, selectively, with objects that communicated taste rather than vulnerability. One shelf had a gap. Not a large gap. The kind you'd miss if you weren't looking for the negative space. The outline of an absence between two present objects that were slightly too far apart, leaning toward each other the way objects did, when something that had held them at the correct distance had been removed. Something had been taken from that shelf. He looked at it for a long moment without pointing it out. Then he looked at the window. At the boulevard below the towers, the 200,000 fine and finished people moving through their decided world. He thought about the posture. The careful posture. Hands flat, head down, the killer taking a moment after doing what they came to do to arrange the result. That wasn't rage, that wasn't expedience, that was a statement. "I was here, I did this, and I think even now that you should look like yourself." Somewhere in that gesture was something almost like respect, or something that had started as respect and become something more complicated. He went back to the desk, crouched again, looked at the hands, at the slightly spread fingers, the deliberate placement of each palm. There on the underside of the desk's lip, almost flush with the surface, the kind of thing you'd miss if you were standing upright and processing a scene with 5 other people, was a small mark. Not a signature, not a symbol he recognized. A single short line and then a curve, like the beginning of a letter or the end of one. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he stood up, put his hands back in his pockets and turned around. "I'll need the full file on Aldous," he said to Sarah. "His administrative record, his current projects, anyone who had regular access to this room, and I'll need a workspace of my own. Somewhere without," he looked at the sourceless light on the ceiling, "whatever this is." "Of course," Sarah said. "Is there anything else?" "Not yet." He took one more look at the room, at the composed figure at the desk, at the gap on the shelf where something wasn't anymore. "He was working on something," Clover said, not a question. "Aldous was always working on something," Pole said from the doorway. "He was very dedicated to the city." Clover moved toward the door. What was he working on most recently? Pole and Sarah exchanged one of their glances. The 4th one of those he'd counted, and he was keeping count. "That will be covered in the briefing materials," Sarah said. "Of course it will," Clover said. He stepped past them into the corridor, where the elevator was already open and waiting. He did not mention the mark under the desk.